Ma'am, drop the marker and step away from the wall, now.
Officer, this is a city inspection. I'm the director of city planning. That wall exists because I approved it.
I don't care who you say you are. You're defacing public
Then you're
property.
about to arrest the wrong black woman on the wrong project.
Turn around. Hands on your head.
The high-definition body camera footage captured the bright, harsh sunlight reflecting off the concrete of the newly inaugurated Riverfront Plaza. It was 10:15 in the morning on a Tuesday, the kind of clear, sharp day where shadows are distinct and visibility is perfect. Officer Kyle Braden, 29 years old and eager to make his mark on the beat, had absolutely no idea that the woman he was rapidly approaching, the one wearing a neon yellow safety vest over a tailored navy pantsuit, was not a vandal. She was Dr. Eleanor Vance, the 58-year-old director of city planning, a woman who held a Ph.D. in urban development and whose signature was on the bottom of the very blueprints that had built this plaza. Eleanor was focused. She held a specialized red grease pencil in her right hand, a tool of the trade for architects and engineers. She was examining a hairline fracture in the decorative retaining wall near the multi-million-dollar fountain installation. She had received a report from the site foreman about potential spalling in the concrete, a defect that could cost the city thousands if not addressed before the contractor's warranty expired. She made a small, precise X next to the crack, then wrote the date and her initials in small, neat script directly on the concrete surface. To an untrained eye looking for trouble, it looked like tagging. To Eleanor, it was a necessary bureaucratic step in infrastructure maintenance. Braden was watching her from his patrol car parked 50 yards away. He had been on the force for 4 years, just enough time to develop a cynicism that he mistook for wisdom. He saw a black woman marking up a wall in a high-value public area. He didn't see the clipboard tucked under her arm. He didn't notice the expensive fabric of her blazer peeking out from the safety vest. He saw the red marker, the motion of writing on a wall, and he saw a quality of life arrest that would look good on his monthly stats. He radioed dispatch, his voice clipped and adrenaline-fueled. "Dispatch 3, Adam 12. Investigating a subject defacing public property at Riverfront Plaza. Black female 50s currently tagging the north wall. Making contact." Eleanor finished her notation and stepped back, squinting at the structure. She adjusted her glasses, the ones with the tortoiseshell frames she had bought in Paris 3 years ago. She was thinking about tensile strength and municipal liability. She was thinking about the budget meeting she had with the city council at 2 or 3 p.m. She was definitely not thinking about being arrested. She heard the heavy crunch of boots on the gravel landscaping behind her. It was a sound she associated with her site inspectors, so she didn't immediately turn. She assumed it was the foreman Mike coming to discuss the remedial work. "Mike, look at this stress fracture," she said, pointing at the wall without looking back. "If we don't inject epoxy here by next week, the freeze-thaw cycle is going to blow this whole facade." "Ma'am, step away from the wall and drop the marker." Now, the voice was not Mike's. It was loud, aggressive, and pitched with a command presence that felt entirely unnecessary for a Tuesday morning. Eleanor turned slowly, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She saw a young police officer, his hand resting ominously near his holster, his posture wide and threatening. He was closing the distance fast, his eyes locked on the red grease pencil in her hand. "Excuse me," Eleanor asked, her voice calm, carrying the timbre of a woman who had spent 30 years commanding lecture halls and boardrooms. "I said drop the weapon and step away from the wall. Put your hands where I can see them." Braden barked, moving into her personal space. Eleanor looked at the grease pencil, then back at the officer. "Officer, this is not a weapon. It is a grease pencil. I am inspecting a structural defect on this retaining wall. I am Dr. Eleanor Vance." "I don't care who you say you are. You're defacing public property. Drop it now or I will drop it for you." Eleanor felt a cold prickle of realization run down her spine. This wasn't a misunderstanding that a simple sentence would fix. This young man had already decided what he was seeing. He wasn't seeing a city director doing her job. He was seeing a suspect. And in his eyes, suspects didn't have explanations. They only had excuses. She carefully, slowly bent her knees and placed the red pencil on the ground, then stood back up, dusting her hands. "The pencil is on the ground," Eleanor said, squaring her shoulders. "Now, if you will allow me to reach into my blazer pocket, I can show you my municipal identification. I am the director of city planning for this municipality. I am authorized to be here. In fact, I am the reason this wall exists." Officer Braden didn't hear director of city planning. He heard defiance. In his 4 years on the street, he had developed a binary way of categorizing the public, those who complied instantly and those who were problems. Eleanor, by speaking in full paragraphs and maintaining eye contact, had placed herself firmly in the problem category. He kicked the grease pencil away with his boot, sending it skittering across the pavement, and stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was meant to intimidate. "Turn around," Braden commanded. "Hands on your head. Interlock your fingers." "Officer, this is ridiculous," Eleanor said, not moving. She held her ground, her feet planted shoulder-width apart. "I am not a threat to you. I am a senior city official conducting a site inspection. Look at the wall. That is a date and a stress mark. It is not graffiti. If you look at the clipboard right there on the ledge, you will see the work order 44B authorized by the mayor's office." "I'm not going to ask you again." Braden snapped his face, reddening. "You are detained for vandalism. You don't get to dictate how this stop goes just because you put on a vest. Anyone can buy a vest at the hardware store. And anyone can buy common sense, yet you seem to be in short supply," Eleanor retorted. It was a mistake. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. She wasn't speaking to a reasonable colleague. She was speaking to an armed man with a fragile ego. But Eleanor Vance had fought for her place at the table in a male-dominated industry for 4 decades. She had stared down corrupt contractors and stubborn council members. She did not take kindly to being treated like a criminal on the very plaza she had fought to secure funding for. "That's it," Braden said. He reached out and grabbed Eleanor's left wrist. "Do not touch me," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "Officer, you are making a grave error. I am warning you. I am Dr. Eleanor Vance. My office is in City Hall Room 404. If you proceed with this, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and you are opening this city up to significant liability. You're under arrest for vandalism and resisting an officer," Braden announced, twisting her arm behind her back with a force that made Eleanor wince. Her shoulders, stiff from years of drafting work, protested sharply. "I am not resisting," Eleanor shouted, the pain causing her voice to break slightly. "I am informing you of your mistake. Check my ID. It is in my left pocket." At this point, the commotion had drawn attention. About 50 feet away, a group of construction workers were finishing the landscaping on the south side of the plaza. The foreman, a burly man named Mike who had worked with Eleanor on 3 different city projects, looked up at the sound of shouting. He squinted against the sun, then his eyes went wide. He dropped his shovel and started jogging over, waving his arms. "Hey! Hey, whoa!" Mike yelled, his heavy boots thudding on the concrete. "Officer, hold on. That's Dr. Vance. That's the planning director." Braden whipped his head around, seeing a large man approaching. His training kicked in tunnel vision. He felt surrounded. "Back off!" Braden yelled at Mike, his hand dropping to his taser. "Stay back, or you will be arrested for obstruction. This is an active crime scene." Mike skidded to a halt about 20 feet away, holding his hands up, palms open. "Officer, you're making a mistake. She's the boss. She runs this whole project. She's allowed to mark the walls. Tell him to check my ID, Mike." Eleanor called out, her face pressed against the rough fabric of her own shoulder as Braden pushed her arm higher. "He won't listen to me. I don't need to check anything," Braden spat, turning his attention back to Eleanor. "You can tell it to the judge. Right now, you're going into the car." "Officer," Eleanor said, forcing herself to breathe through the pain in her shoulder. "I am pleading with you to use your discretion. Look at me. Look at my credentials. If you arrest me, you are arresting the woman who approves your precinct's facility budget. Do you understand the optics of what you are doing?" Are you threatening me? Braden asked, incredulous. He tightened his grip. Did you just threaten a police officer? I am stating a fact. Eleanor replied, her dignity remaining intact even as the first handcuff clicked onto her wrist. Incompetence is not a crime, officer, but false arrest is. And you are currently committing one in broad daylight with witnesses. Braden didn't answer. He simply grabbed her other wrist and yanked it back. The second cuff clicked. The sound was distinct, sharp, and final. It echoed across the plaza, silencing the birds and the distant traffic. Eleanor Vance, a pillar of the community, a deaconess at her church, and a mother of 2 Ivy League graduates, stood in handcuffs on the project that was supposed to be her legacy. The metal of the handcuffs bit into the soft skin of Eleanor's wrists. It was a sensation she had never experienced, cold and unyielding. She had spent a lifetime following the rules. She paid her taxes early. She drove the speed limit. She stopped at yellow lights. She believed in the system because she was part of the machinery that made the system work. But as Officer Braden shoved her forward, causing her to stumble slightly in her orthopedic heels, that belief began to fracture. Walk, Braden commanded, pushing her toward his patrol car. I am walking, Eleanor said, regaining her balance. She refused to hang her head. She looked straight ahead, her chin elevated. The construction crew was gathering now, phones out recording. Mike was on his phone frantically dialing someone. Eleanor hoped it was the mayor. You're hurting her, one of the younger workers yelled. She's almost 60 years old, man. Take it easy. Step back, Braden yelled over his shoulder, clearly agitated. He felt the eyes on him, the cameras. In his mind, he was the thin blue line holding back chaos. He had convinced himself that this woman's arrogance was proof of her guilt. Innocent people were humble. They were scared. This woman acted like she owned the place. Therefore, she was a criminal. It was a twisted logic that had served him poorly in the past, but never this poorly. Officer, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conversational volume as they neared the car. She wanted to give him one last off-ramp. My identification is in my pocket. It is a smart card with a holographic city seal. It has my chip access code for City Hall. If you look at it, you will see I am telling the truth. You can uncuff me right here. We can call this a misunderstanding. You can apologize, and I will likely let this go as a training error. But if you put me in that car, if you transport me to the station, there is no turning back. You will seal your fate. Braden paused for a microsecond. His hand hovered near her pocket, but the adrenaline and the crowd watching him made him dig his heels in. If he checked now and she was right, he would look like an idiot in front of these construction workers. He would lose face. To a man like Kyle Braden, losing face was worse than being wrong. I've heard it all before, lady, Braden said, opening the back door of his cruiser. Everybody is somebody important when the cuffs go on. Get in. He placed his hand on top of her head, a gesture she found patronizingly offensive, and guided her into the cramped back seat. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. The car smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. As the door slammed shut, sealing her inside, the noise of the outside world was cut off. It was suddenly quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the crackle of the police radio. Eleanor sat awkwardly, her hands pinned behind her back. She took a deep breath, regulating her heart rate. She was furious, a cold, burning rage that settled in her stomach, but she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She began to catalog everything. Time of arrest, 10:22 a.m. Officer badge number 4922, name tag Braden, vehicle number 312. Witnesses Michael Henderson and the Site B crew. She was treating this like a deposition. She was preparing her case. Braden got into the driver's seat. He adjusted his rearview mirror to look at her. Comfortable? He asked, a sneer in his voice. I am perfectly fine. Eleanor lied. Her shoulder was throbbing. I suggest you drive carefully. I would hate to add reckless endangerment to the list of torts we will be discussing with the city attorney. You know a lot of legal words for a tagger, Braden said, putting the car in gear. I know the law because I write the municipal codes you are supposed to enforce, Eleanor replied. You cited me for violation of Code 602 defacing property, but you failed to check for authorization under Code 114 subsection C, which grants city directors right-of-way for inspection. You are incompetent, Officer Braden, and I am going to ensure that every taxpayer in this city knows it. Braden laughed a short, sharp bark. Yeah, okay. We'll see what the sergeant says. Yes, Eleanor whispered to herself as the car pulled away, leaving the confused construction workers behind. We certainly will. As they drove through the streets, she had helped plan past the community center she had secured. Grants for Eleanor felt a profound sense of irony. She was being driven to jail through the very arteries of the city she kept alive. She looked out the window, seeing the world from the perspective of the disenfranchised for the first time in decades. She realized that if she, a woman with a PhD and the mayor's personal cell phone number, could be treated like this, then God help the teenagers in her neighborhood who had nothing but their word. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. To Officer Braden, it was a victory lap. He had caught a vandal in the act, someone who thought they were above the law. He was already mentally writing his report using phrases like belligerent suspect and refusal to comply. He turned up the radio, slightly drowning out the silence from the back seat. To Eleanor, the drive was a masterclass in observation. She watched Braden's driving. He didn't use his turn signal when changing lanes on 4th Street. He rolled through a stop sign near the high school. She noted it all. Failure to signal. Failure to stop. Every infraction was another nail in the coffin of his credibility. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was an auditor. And Officer Braden was failing the audit spectacularly. You're quiet back there, Braden said, glancing in the mirror again. Realized you're in trouble. I am saving my breath for someone who has the capacity to understand it, Eleanor said. I am reviewing your personnel file in my head. I'm wondering, officer, how many other vandals you've arrested this month. Is this a pattern? Do you target women? Do you target older black women specifically? I target criminals, Braden said defensively. Don't try to make this about race. You broke the law. The law is nuanced, officer. Your understanding of it is blunt force. They pulled into the sally port of the 12th precinct. The heavy metal gate rolled down behind them with a clang that sounded like a dungeon sealing shut. Braden parked the car and got out. He opened the back door and hauled Eleanor out. Her legs were stiff. The handcuffs had cut off some circulation and her hands felt numb. Let's go. Booking is this way, Braden said, gripping her arm again. He marched her through the sterile concrete hallways. They passed a few other officers. One, an older man drinking coffee, looked at Eleanor, then at her clothes, the high-end blazer, the pearls visible under the safety vest. He frowned, looking at Braden with a questioning expression. Braden ignored him, chin up, marching his prize to the desk. Eleanor kept her head high. She walked with the dignity of a queen going to the gallows, knowing that the executioner was the one who would eventually lose his head. They reached the booking area. The smell of ammonia and sweat was overpowering. There was a glass partition, and behind it sat the desk sergeant. Braden shoved Eleanor toward the counter. One for vandalism. Caught her tagging the new Riverfront Plaza. Resisted arrest, refused to ID. Eleanor took a deep breath. She waited. She knew the man behind the desk. Sergeant Thomas Miller. He had been the liaison for the new precinct expansion project 2 years ago. They had sat in 3 months of committee meetings together. She knew about his daughter's soccer scholarship. He knew about her husband's hip surgery. Sergeant Miller looked up from his computer, annoyed at the interruption. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the suspect. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Miller's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked. He looked at Braden, who was grinning like a cat with a canary. Then he looked back at Eleanor, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He slowly stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Officer Braden." Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, Sarge. Got her red-handed. Grease pencil. Real nasty attitude, too," Braden said, oblivious to the temperature dropping in the room. "Officer Braden," Miller said again, louder this time. "Do you know who this is? Some lady who thinks she owns the sidewalk." Braden scoffed. "Kyle," Miller said, dropping the rank, his voice turning into a hiss of pure panic. "That is Dr. Eleanor Vance. She is the city planning director. She signs the checks for the AC unit you're enjoying right now. She reports directly to the mayor." Braden's smile faltered. He looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him, her expression completely flat. "Hello, Thomas," Eleanor said calmly. "How is Sarah's knee healing?" The air was sucked out of the room. Officer Braden looked from Sergeant Miller to Eleanor, and for the first time the armor of his arrogance cracked. He saw the recognition in his superior's eyes, the fear. It wasn't just recognition, it was deference. "Dr. Vance," Sergeant Miller stammered, coming around the desk. He moved with a speed that belied his age. I am so sorry. I don't... Kyle, take those cuffs off her. Right now." Braden stood frozen. His brain was misfiring. "But, Sarge, I saw her. She was writing on the wall. She refused to." "She was doing her job, you moron," Miller shouted, his face turning red. "She built the damn wall, uncuff her. Now." Braden's hands shook as he reached for his key. He fumbled with the mechanism. Eleanor stood perfectly still, allowing him to struggle. When the cuffs finally clicked open and fell away, she brought her hands forward. Her wrists were marked with angry red indentations. She rubbed them slowly, grimacing. "Dr. Vance, please," Miller said, reaching for a chair. "Sit down. I'll get you water. I'll get the captain." "I don't want water, Thomas," Eleanor said, her voice icy. "I want my phone, and I want this officer's badge number entered into the record as the arresting officer. Do not delete the entry. I want the arrest logged." "Ma'am, we can void this," Braden said, his voice small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase. "I didn't know. You didn't show me the ID." Eleanor turned on him, and the fury she had suppressed in the car finally flared. "I told you 5 times who I was. I told you to check my pocket. You refused because you decided that a black woman in a safety vest could only be a criminal. Your ignorance is not an excuse, officer. It is the problem." I was just following protocol," Braden mumbled, retreating a step. "Protocol requires reasonable suspicion," Eleanor snapped. "You had bias. There is a difference." "Miller," Eleanor barked, turning back to the sergeant. "Get Captain Reynolds down here. Now! And tell him to bring the preservation forms for the body camera footage. If 1 second of that video goes missing, I will sue this department into the Stone Age." "Yes, ma'am." "Right away, ma'am." Miller scrambled for the phone. Braden stood in the corner, realizing his career was dissolving before his eyes. He watched Eleanor Vance, the woman he had manhandled and mocked, take charge of his own precinct. She pulled a notebook from her pocket, the only thing he hadn't confiscated, and began writing. What are you doing?" Braden asked weakly. "I am documenting the bruising on my wrists while it is fresh," Eleanor said without looking up. "And I am writing down the names of every officer who walked past me in the hallway and did nothing. You are going to learn, Officer Braden, that details matter, and I am very, very good at details." The door to the inner offices burst open. Captain Reynolds, a man Eleanor had clashed with over zoning laws for the new impound lot, came storming out. He was buttoning his uniform jacket, looking like he had just been woken from a nightmare. He saw Eleanor rubbing her wrists. He saw the terrified look on Braden's face. He saw Miller cowering behind the desk. "Dr. Vance," Reynolds said, approaching her with hands raised in a placating gesture. "Eleanor, I just got the call. Please tell me this is a joke." "Do I look like I am laughing, Harold?" Eleanor asked, holding up her wrists. The skin was broken in one place, a small drop of blood welling up. Reynolds looked at the blood. He looked at Braden. "Braden, my office. Now, don't speak to anyone. Just sit there and pray."
"But, sir—" "Go!"
Reynolds roared. Braden flinched and scurried away, disappearing down the hall. Reynolds turned back to Eleanor. "Eleanor, I am mortified. We will fix this. We'll get you a ride home. We'll wipe the record." "You will do no such thing," Eleanor said, standing up. "You will process the paperwork. You will generate the arrest report. And then you will hand me a copy. Because when I file my formal complaint, I want the paper trail to be immaculate. You are not sweeping this under the rug, Harold. This isn't a zoning dispute. This is a civil rights violation." "Eleanor, be reasonable. He's a young kid. He made a mistake." "He is 29 years old. He carries a gun. He has the power to take away freedom. He does not get the luxury of being a kid," Eleanor said. "And if he did this to me, the city planning director, imagine what he does to the janitors, the teachers, the bus drivers who don't have my number in their phone. No, Harold. We are going to do this by the book. My book." Captain Reynolds stared at Eleanor. He knew that tone. It was the same tone she used when she denied the expansion of the parking garage because it violated groundwater regulations. It was immovable. "Okay," Reynolds said, exhaling a long breath. "Okay, we do it your way. Miller, print the booking sheet. Mark it, released, insufficient grounds. But print the original charge sheet first." Eleanor waited. She refused to sit. She stood in the center of the booking room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. She felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. But she held her posture. She was representing every person who had ever stood in this room without a title to protect them. Miller handed her the paperwork. His hands were shaking. "Here you go, Dr. Vance. Again, I had no idea." "You didn't stop him, Thomas," Eleanor said softly, taking the papers. "You saw him march me in. You saw the cuffs. You didn't ask a question until you recognized my face. That is what you need to think about tonight." Miller looked down, ashamed. "I want the body camera footage," Eleanor said to Reynolds. "You know I can't give that to you without a subpoena, Eleanor. It's evidence." "Then consider this my verbal notice of intent to sue," Eleanor said. "Preserve it. If it gets corrupted or lost, I will have the FBI here so fast your head will spin. I want the dash cam too, and the audio from the transport." "It will be preserved," Reynolds promised. "I'll lock it down personally." "Good." Eleanor looked at her watch. "I have a city council meeting at 2:00 p.m. I intend to be there, and I intend to wear short sleeves so the council can see these bruises." Reynolds winced. "Eleanor, don't." "I am going to leave now," Eleanor interrupted. "I will call my husband to pick me up. Do not offer me a ride. I do not wish to be in a police car for a very long time." She walked out of the precinct, the paperwork clutched in her hand. The sun was still shining outside, blindingly bright. It was 11:15 a.m. She had lost an hour of her life. She stood on the sidewalk waiting for her husband, trembling slightly now that the performance was over. She looked at her wrists. They were swelling. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call the mayor yet. She called her lawyer, a civil rights specialist named Marcus. "Marcus," she said when he answered. "It's Eleanor. I need you to file a FOIA request immediately for the disciplinary record of Officer Kyle Braden and get a photographer to my house. I have injuries." "Eleanor, what happened? Are you okay?" "I was arrested for doing my job, Marcus, and I'm going to make sure it never happens to anyone in this city again." She hung up and dialed her assistant. "Cancel my lunch, but keep the 2:00 p.m. council meeting, And tell the mayor I need 5 minutes at the start of the session. Emergency privilege. Dr. Vance, are you all right? You sound different. I am angry, Brenda. I am very, very angry. I'll see you at 2. When her husband's car pulled up, she got in and finally let the tears fall. Not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming release of tension. Her husband, a retired surgeon, looked at her wrists and his face went dark. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. "A system," Eleanor said, wiping her eyes. "A broken system. But I'm going to fix it. That's what I do. I fix broken structures." The city council meeting was absolute chaos. Eleanor walked in at 2:00 p.m. sharp wearing a sleeveless cream blouse that starkly contrasted with the dark purple bruising forming around her wrists. She didn't say a word about it initially. She simply gave her report on the budget variance for the Riverfront Plaza. But every eye in the room, the council members, the press, the public, was glued to her arms. When she finished her presentation, she looked up at the mayor. "Mr. Mayor, before I yield the floor, I must address an incident that occurred this morning at the very plaza we are discussing." She told the story. She didn't embellish. She was clinical, precise, and devastating. She produced the booking sheet. She described the cell. She described the fear. The room went silent. Then the questions started. The press went into a frenzy. By 5:00 p.m., the story was the lead on every local news station. City director arrested for inspecting own project. The video footage leaked 2 days later. It wasn't clear who leaked it. Some suspected a sympathetic clerk in the records department, others thought Marcus had worked a miracle, but it hit the internet like a bomb. The visual of Officer Braden screaming at a calm, well-dressed older woman twisting her arm and ignoring her clear identification was undeniable. It went viral globally. The hashtag #DrVance trended for 3 days. The internal affairs investigation was swift, mostly because there was nowhere for Braden to hide. The investigators pulled his history. It was a roadmap of bias. Over his 4 years, Braden had a statistically impossible rate of stopping Black and Latino residents for loitering and vandalism. He had 6 excessive force complaints, all dismissed by previous supervisors as "he said, she said." But he couldn't dismiss this one. This wasn't "he said, she said." This was "he said, the director of city planning said." Captain Reynolds was forced to answer why those previous complaints were ignored. Sergeant Miller was reprimanded for failing to intervene sooner. The entire precinct was placed under a microscope. The lawsuit was filed a week later. Vance v. the city. It didn't ask for millions. It asked for policy changes. It demanded a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. It demanded mandatory de-escalation training, and it demanded the immediate termination of Officer Kyle Braden. The city attorney, who had known Eleanor for 20 years, didn't even try to fight it. "We settle," he told the mayor. "We give her whatever she wants. If this goes to a jury, they will give her the keys to the city." Braden was placed on unpaid leave, then fired 3 weeks later. The union tried to file a grievance, arguing he was stressed, but the public outcry was so vitriolic that they quietly dropped it. Braden's certification was revoked by the state board. He would never carry a badge again. But the victory wasn't just in the firing. It was in the data. The investigation Eleanor triggered forced the department to review 5 years of arrests. They found over 200 cases similar to hers, people arrested for resisting when they were simply asking why they were being stopped. The district attorney began overturning convictions. People who had lost jobs and housing because of Braden and officers like him were getting their records cleared. Eleanor sat in her office watching the news report about the settlements. She touched her wrist. The bruise was fading to a yellow-green, but the memory was vivid. She felt a heavy burden. She had won because she was Dr. Vance. She had won because she had power. 6 months later, Eleanor returned to Riverfront Plaza. It was a crisp autumn day. The leaves on the trees she had selected were turning a brilliant gold. The fountain was running perfectly. She wasn't wearing a safety vest this time. She was wearing a warm wool coat. She walked to the north wall, the spot where it had happened. The crack had been repaired, the concrete smooth and seamless. The X she had drawn was gone, covered by the repair work. She stood there for a long time, watching the people enjoy the space. A young father pushing a stroller, a group of teenagers skateboarding on the ledges, a couple eating lunch on a bench. She saw a police officer walking the beat. He was older with a calm demeanor. He stopped to talk to the teenagers. He didn't yell. He joked with them, warning them to be careful not to chip the stone, but he didn't kick them out. He saw Eleanor and nodded respectfully. "Afternoon, Dr. Vance." "Officer." She nodded back. The settlement money, $450,000, had gone entirely into a legal defense fund for wrongful arrests. Eleanor hadn't kept a dime. She didn't need the money. She needed the change. The Civilian Oversight Board was up and running, and Eleanor sat on it. They reviewed every use of force incident. The culture was shifting. Slowly, painfully, but it was shifting. Eleanor touched the cold stone of the wall. She thought about Kyle Braden. She didn't hate him anymore. She pitied him. He had been a product of a culture that taught him fear was a virtue and authority was absolute. He had lost his career because he couldn't see the humanity in the woman standing in front of him. She took a deep breath of the cool air. She had built this plaza for the city, but in the end, the plaza had built something in her. It had hardened her resolve. It had reminded her that concrete and steel were easy to fix. Human systems were much harder. But she was an engineer at heart. She knew that if a foundation was rotten, you didn't paint over it. You dug it out, and you poured something new. She turned and walked back toward City Hall. There was a budget meeting at 2:30 p.m., and Dr. Eleanor Vance was never late. This story reminds us that titles and suits don't protect us from bias, but the courage to stand up can protect the future for others. It forces us to ask, if this happened to a city director, what happens to those without a voice? What would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have settled or taken it all the way to a jury trial? Do you think the punishment for Officer Braden was enough, or should he have faced criminal charges? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.